And I think as humans, we get to learn how to have that deep, intuitive slowing down, going into the roots, connecting to our ancestors, connecting to the land, to listen to what's next, what's my next step. And so much of the work that I do is around letting go of the concepts and the beliefs and the agreements of how it should be, or like that we need to fix it, and really tuning into what's here now.
Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today is my pleasure to have HeatherAsh Amara with us. HeatherAsh is the Warrior Goddess Mama, the creator of the Warrior Goddess Training Series and the Warrior Heart Practice. She's dedicated to supporting people in developing their self-intimacy, steadiness, and stillness by sharing the most potent tools from a variety of world traditions. She brings an open-hearted, inclusive worldview to her writings and teachings. She can often be found covered in adobe mud on her ranch, dancing around the fire and deepening into the mystery. HeatherAsh, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Stephan. It's so good to be here.
Let's start by, if you could share a bit of your origin story. How did you become so interested in open-heartedness and stillness and native traditions and things like that?
I had an unusual childhood in that my parents, my sister and I moved around the world. Pretty much every 2 years we would move someplace new, and every summer my parents would take my sister and I someplace to visit. Europe, India, Nepal, Egypt. So when I was 7 years old, I had an experience that really changed the trajectory of my life. And I was walking in India with my family, and I remember I was holding my father's hand and thinking about my white shoes because I was worried my white shoes were going to get dirty. So that's where my head was. And I remember I looked up and there was a 7-year-old girl walking towards me, rags, bare feet, we're about the same height. And as we came close to each other, our eyes locked and everything else in the world fell away. And I fell completely in love and realized that the illusion of separation, of different cultures or life, like all of that just dissolved. And my heart completely opened to this connection. And then we passed, and I, of course, never saw her again. But I then had this knowing in my bones. And that was really fed by being raised in Buddhist culture. So I mostly spent my childhood in Hong Kong, Bangkok, and Singapore. And just seeing people praying every day to the trees, doing movement practice. I always felt on the outside, but I always wanted to be on the inside. And so when I came to the United States to go to college, I started studying different spiritual traditions. And that opened the world of like, this is what I've been looking for, is that connection to nature, the cycles, and to the divine.
Wow, amazing. And this 7-year-old girl, have you ever tried to communicate with her telepathically or through just like some sort of soul connection? She'd be your same age now if she's still on the earth plane. Have you tried connecting to her?
I haven't tried journeying. It's such a great idea. Although I feel her all the time in my heart. And that it feels like she's a portal. And I hope I'm a portal in her life too, to open into that place of connection.
Because if you can connect with, let's say, your future self telepathically and get advice from the 10-year older version of you on how to deal with certain challenges you're facing, imagine what you could learn and experience through connecting with her. I mean, it sounds like you guys are probably a soul family, even though you only saw her that one time. Probably not the first time you've seen her or experienced her beyond this incarnation is my guess. But you tell me, what does your intuition tell you?
Yeah, I think that is probably true. And I think all of us have those glimpses into other dimensions and understandings. And that when we remember them, they can always be guides for us. And that's so true. Yeah, it makes me think my grandmother, who was very spiritual, committed suicide when she was 40. Like, I never knew that growing up. My parents never talked about it. It was really, of course, very traumatic. And when I learned my grandma, like what happened, I journeyed to meet with her. And that connection still supports me, like the amount of love and support and wisdom that is bridged from someone I never met, but is such a huge part of my life. So I love all those invisible threads in the world around us.
Yeah. So the unseen world is more real than the seen world, right? So the experiences you've had with your grandmother, do you feel that she is resolved about the suicide? If all the karmic debt, for lack of a better word, has been paid up on the suicide? Because that's pretty serious business to commit suicide.
Yeah, I feel like she feels very clear. And in terms of understanding that the time that she was in had was not in alignment with who she was, that there was a lot of rigidity and she tried to fit herself into something that never fit her. So I always feel that clarity from her.
Do you ever feel that way yourself?
I used to, for sure. Yeah, especially when I was in college, I got really big into politics and had this like feeling sense of I'm going to fight for what's right and put a lot of energy into trying to fit into what I felt like was the place to put my energy. And I remember the time where I was like, looked around, was like, okay, wait a minute. All of us are angry. All my friends are angry. I'm angry. Nothing's changing. And I don't fit here. So that was really when I started looking into that connection to spirit and the divine and studying different spiritual traditions from around the world and finding the connection. Remember when I started reading about European shamanism, and my background's French and Scottish is my family. I was like, oh, this is my roots.
Give us a taste of what European shamanism entails.
It's very much around being in tune with the cycles and the seasons. And in Western culture, we tend to be very linear. We tend to be very, if you just do A, B, and C, you'll get to D. And what that often doesn't take into account is life, that life is very unpredictable and that it's mysterious. And for me, when I started studying nature cycles of really understanding there's birth and there is death, and that death is a beautiful, beautiful, important part of life, and really starting to embrace darkness as well as light. And instead of creating the duality of this is good, this is bad, nature traditions and all religions, we can go back to earth-based spiritual traditions, that there's this coming home to letting everything be a teacher, letting life be our teacher, letting the trees and the plants and the seasons. And for me, it's really taught me how to be very resilient and rooted in my relationship with life and expect the unexpected and learn how to play with what's happening. I always tell the people that I work with, the community that we have, that you can use everything against yourself, or you can use anything to open your heart to be more present, no matter how difficult it is. And that's really one of the big messages of coming back into relationship with the elements and the seasons and the cycles.
Native American traditions, there's a lot that you take from that and apply in your spiritual practices and working with your clients, I imagine, right?
Similar, yes. So again, all earth-based traditions, whether it's indigenous to the Americas or to Europe, that have the foundation of that deep respect for life and for death and connection to the ancestors. And so since I live now in the Americas, I'm very connected to the land where I live. I live in New Mexico, and I'm really blessed to steward 180 acres of land that is magnificent, and was also just lost 175 acres of that land to the wildfire that came through New Mexico last year.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it's been challenging and also beautiful because I'm like, all right, front lines, we're navigating so much change, and I committed to steward and be present for this land. And so how do I show up with what it needs now rather than what I wish it was or what I remember it was? For sure, there's been a lot of grief. And I'm this year now that it's been, I guess, 8 months now, there's an opening into, okay, what does the land need? And how can we serve and support the the new creation that wants to be here.
Do you get a sense of what that is to be? What what the land wants from you, or what the creator presenting you as the gift or the lesson?
Some of it, definitely a piece of it, which is what the land has always taught me, is just to slow down and listen. And so far the listening has been just go slow. And to one of the things that's interesting is even though we lost so much of the forest, the firefighters managed to save. We built an adobe building over the pandemic, so the community came together and we built this community kitchen, and we were able to evacuate the yurt that we had up there. And so the infrastructure was all saved, and this little island of green trees. And for me, that message was, yes, we want you to stay, like stay and take your time with regenerating. So it's put me on a whole amazing path of learning about regeneration and mushroom mycelium, and the land's been very much like, yes, let's keep going, and this is going to be a slow process. So such a good teacher.
Wow. This reminds me of a story I just learned about from the book The Convoluted Universe, Volume 3. It's by Dolores Cannon. Are you familiar with Dolores Cannon?
No.
Oh, phenomenal. She's no longer in the physical. She passed in, I think, 2015 or something like that. But the books she's written and the seminars she's presented, all the stuff you find on YouTube. So there's a story. She was a hypnotherapist, but she specialized in accessing the subconscious, or the unified field would be another way of referring to it, through these deep hypnosis sessions. She would access her clients, the subconscious, and she'd have conversations with them and find out why was her client put into this particular situation, what sort of past life traumas or scenarios are relevant to this. And then she started to delve into the time in between lives and what it's like to be back home on the other side of the veil. It's fascinating. But the story I want to share with you that I just recently heard, because I'm listening to the audiobook, and it relates to what happened with you and the wildfires. There is this entire planet. So sometimes we incarnate as aliens, and there's this entire planet that was covered by this one kind of tree. And the bark of that tree was edible. And the bark would fall off of the tree and end up on the floor of the planet. So that was just a normal process. And the sentient creature that this woman, the client of Dolores, incarnated as in this lifetime was one of these creatures. And it was the only creature on the planet. And the only tree on the planet, or the only plant life, was this tree that they would eat the bark of. And that's how they survived. She, as this creature, would lay eggs, and then those eggs would be fertilized by the male, and each male would have maybe some number of females in her tribe, or whatever you'd call it. There were 20 females and one male, and he was a very strong male, so he was able to protect his territory. But what happened was the other males would compete with each other for territory, and they'd fight, and they would try and get more and more females, and it became very unsustainable. And then the creatures would eat the bark directly off of the trees, and not just off of the floor of the forest, and that would kill the trees. Now, the male of this pack of 20 that she was a part of, that tribe, he was wise, and he knew that he couldn't have any more than 20. That was the maximum, and that he had to protect his territory, and that they could not eat off of the trees themselves. They had to only eat the bark off the floor. So fast forward to an important date, because she has them do that in the process of the hypnosis, because it was pretty much the same thing day after day. Eat the bark off the floor, lay eggs, raise the babies, don't get too much of a footprint there, and end up killing off your food supply. Well, fast forward, I don't know how many years it was, but she was still in that tribe, and the whole planet was dead. except for this little area that was the territory of that one male. All the other creatures of that species dead, all of the trees gone, just this one little patch, and the entire planet was dead. And the lesson from this, because this is important, is why was this lifetime presented and shown? You could have thousands of lifetimes, and this was the one that was brought forth in the hypnosis session. And the reason was because it's all about balance. So for you, maybe the lesson relates to this story that I just shared about balance. And the term kionoskatsi, so life out of balance, and that's happening all around us. And we can't save everybody. We can't take everybody with us as we ascend to the fifth dimension, or whatever you believe about how this works. Some people choose to stay behind. Some people choose to stay in the dark, and they're going to be in the group that is on the dead part of the planet, or whatever the metaphor is that you want to choose. But it feels like this is relevant to you. And that movie, by the way, Kayanaskatsi, which is many years old now, is such a fabulous documentary of how out of balance most of society is. So what are your thoughts on all that I just shared? I didn't mean to go on this whole diatribe about this little thing I listened to the other day in the audiobook.
It does feel like we are, of course, very out of balance. And that's part of why I chose to have a piece of property that's off grid and that is built by hand. And because I feel like we as humans, where the healing is going to happen is to reconnect with the earth and to learn how to listen to how do we rebuild from the roots up. Because we as Westerners so much want to, like, let's just grow stuff and let's do more scientific ways to grow things without having an understanding of the cycles of life. We're so fast and wanting everything to happen right now. And, this idea of optimization for me is that if I put my awareness in building my roots so that I'm sustainable and that I'm well grounded where I'm at, and I'm such a nomad, but that I'm well grounded wherever I happen to be, that then what grows is sustainable. And so I feel like with the land right now, I'm getting this really important lesson of, in the 70s, the Boy Scouts had come through and planted one kind of tree. So similar to your story, there was ponderosa pines planted too close together. And that's part of why the wildfire was so bad, is that the trees were too close together. They were monocropped, basically. So now to really look at how to create diversity, and I think this is such an important lesson for all of us, is that the places where we're trying to be too efficient, we can lose the value of really creating diversity in the landscapes that we're in and in our lives. And that part of learning how to be resilient is having a lot of different tools and a lot of different ways that we're connecting with ourselves and with our communities and with the land where we live on, and learning how to really build from the roots up. So that's been my journey.
There's an analogy here that I think is appropriate. Men need to learn how to really listen to the women in their lives, because men are wired differently from women, just generally speaking, in terms of men like to fix things. I'm very general and overly broad. But if we instead focus on listening so that the woman feels heard, let's say it's his wife, then the need to fix goes away and she can solve her own problem. She just wants to feel heard and understood. And the best example of this I can think of is a funny YouTube clip. It's called "It's Not About the Nail." And that is applicable, this idea of listening instead of trying to fix everything, because the Boy Scouts came in without listening. They didn't listen to the land. They didn't listen to the still small voice. They just went and planted, monocropped to fix.
Exactly. Yeah. And I have people that are like, okay, we'll go in and we'll replant everything. And yet we're in a different time. It may be that the ponderosa forests aren't sustainable any longer because of climate change. And so that's the deep listening of letting go of what I think should be there or what has been there to really listen to what wants to be here now. And I think as humans, we get to learn how to have that deep intuitive slowing down, going into the roots, connecting to our ancestors, connecting to the land, to listen to what's next, what's my next step. And so much of the work that I do is around letting go of the concepts and the beliefs and the agreements of how it should be, or like that we need to fix it, and really tuning into what's here now.
Yeah. Now, if this kind of fix before the wildfire would have been implemented of let's put a diversity of trees in place instead, wouldn't that have necessitated chopping down all the pine trees? That would have been a huge deal to implement, correct?
Well, there had already been a wildfire that had come through in the 70s. So they had a blank slate then as well as we do now.
Right, but if let's say it was a year ago, we were having this conversation and they were thinking, let's start over. How do we fix things or address this issue of the monocrop and the trees too close together and lack of diversity? This actually was a gift, maybe in disguise, right? The wildfire that wiped all those trees out.
It's definitely a opportunity.
It's hard though when you see the destruction and you've experienced it firsthand. You went through that trauma. You're probably still grieving, I would imagine.
Definitely. And it's ongoing. I think grief is something that unfolds in its own time. And so I had the immediate grief of so much loss. And it wasn't just me, it was my entire community. It was the biggest wildfire in New Mexico. So a lot of people have lived on that land for, many, 500, there's many multiple generations and indigenous people that live in that land that lost everything. There's still really big community trauma that's happened as well. And it's so funny with grief because people were like, oh, well, it'll grow back. Or I'm like, yes, it will, but give me a moment to grieve in the very beginning because people want you to move through grief quickly. And I've really just know it's going to come when it comes. And, you walk through the land and you find a part of this has happened several times now where there's this like one piece, one shin bone of a deer that you're like, yeah, sweetheart, didn't make it. So, because it wasn't just the forest, it was all the animals and all the bugs and all the mycelial network, all of it got taken. So, and it is part of life as well. But as we come into the relationship with the cycles, we can allow ourselves to be in the grief. We can allow ourselves to be in the joy, and it happens simultaneously. I have a sense of excitement of like, okay, I'm going to learn how to really now be in relationship with this land and what it wants now. That's exciting. And I'm meeting incredible people and learning about really cutting edge science that's happening now around land regeneration that's happening all over the planet. And the grief is also there when I go for a walk and it's black and there's black, acres and acres of black trees and lots of work to figure out how do I do this. So it's definitely taught me I can't fix this. I can listen. I can be in relationship. And so often when we are in that mode of fixing, we're not in relationship any longer. We're in our minds, we're in our heads. And so coming back into the heart, coming in back into how can I bring my presence, my love, my intimacy, my grief, all of it into this moment with what's needed, and wait for the insights to come in, to arise.
So you said earlier that trees are our teacher. Do you regularly connect with the souls of the trees and ask them what lessons or messages they have to share with you?
I do. And previous to the wildfire, it's kind of a fun story. When we just bought the land and I was spending time on it, and I was like, I'm not connecting for some reason. Like there's something I'm missing. I don't know what I'm missing, but I'm missing something. And I did a bunch of meditation and spent like a week up there just getting really quiet. And I realized, oh, I need to go honor and connect with each of the different types of trees that are on the land. So I went and did prayers and meditations and talked with, there's one big mama pine tree, there's a grandma Douglas tree, Douglas fir. Both those trees survived, which is incredible, with the oak trees and with the juniper. And so I went and built altars and talked to them. And then, like, everything opened. All of a sudden, land was like, okay, come on in. Like, you see us. And when the fire happened, because the technology is such now, I could watch where the fire was. So I'm literally sitting in my truck and I check and I'm like, it's in my neighbor's, like the wildfire is in my neighbor's land. And I knew it was going to come through. And I just cried and cried. And as I was crying, I started singing to the trees. I'm like, what else do you do? So I just imagined myself there and I sang to the trees and apologized and told them I loved them as the fire went through. There's trees. This is the amazing thing about the connection to the land is that the trees now, like it looks like almost all of them are dead, but they're actually picking certain trees and they're sending the resources, the dying trees are sending the resources to specific trees that they think are going to live. So that's part of what my prayer and my connection to the land has been, is just helping the reorganization happen, because the land has been in shock and it's also so much was devastated. It's having to go really far to find a tree that might survive, because they talk through the root systems, through the mycelial networks. So there's been trees that I was positive were dead that are coming back. And I know it's because all the prayers from not just me, the community, the wisdom of the trees, like all of that together is helping to bring things back, helped to keep, I mean, the grandma tree, it's a 400-year-old Douglas fir at the northwest edge of the property. And the first day that I went up to the land, and I have to go see if she made it. And it's completely dead. I'm walking through, I'm crying, it's completely dead. And I come around the corner and there she is, and she's untouched. Just amazing, that connection that happens when there's deep love and respect. And it doesn't mean the wildfire doesn't go through, like the wildfire went through, but there's also miracles that happen when you have that connection to land, and they still teach me and call to me and inform me.
Yeah, miracles are everywhere. What would be an example of a journey that you might have taken that involved trauma, the loss of the trees and the different community members coming together and grieving and working together to try and rebuild or just cope? What would be an example of a journey that you took in regards to that?
So many of the people that are part of our community are online, and obviously because of the pandemic, we couldn't be together physically. But there was a ceremony that we did and a journey that we did where there was a group of us that were physically on the land and had built a circle and had connected there and called in all of the surviving trees as well as the community. And there was this beautiful journey of going into the womb where the darkness, where gestation happens. And so part of the journey that we did was going into that womb darkness and letting ourselves connect with the roots and opening to how do we feed the roots from the bot, like how do we nourish the roots from the depths of the earth, and let that go up through without needing to know what's going to happen, what's the growth going to look like, is it going to work, of just deeply opening our hearts, feeding the soil, feeding all of the, connecting to ancestors, and then letting that go through the land. So that's one of the journeys that we've been doing, is that connection into the mystery through the earth and through the ancestors. And also understanding there's been lots of people that have been part of that particular part of the planet for a long time. It's so important for us in our journeys to connect with the ancestors and the ones that have gone before us, as well as ones that are coming after us as well. So that's been my prayer, is calling in the ones that are coming after to help teach me how to be a better human and more connected to the land as well. Ancestors and descendants are all on that healing path.
I don't know if you're familiar with Neil Donald Walsh. He wrote Conversations with God. He wrote a children's book called little soul in the sun, and he's amazing. And the way he describes how we're all candles in the sun, I thought is really, really poignant. We're these little beings of light that want to experience what being the light is without the ability to do so because we're on the sun. God creates darkness and gives us the opportunity to experience being forgiving and unconditionally loving and so forth by contracting his light, making room for darkness, creating darkness. And then we can light up the room. But we need somebody to forgive. So then we have other souls who agree to be the villain in our movie and our story. And we forget that was the agreement. And they feel like horrible wretches to us that are unforgivable. And we completely forgot our soul contracts that we had with them. So looking at things from that perspective, for a moment, I'm curious to hear how ancestors and descendants and the whole Native American and European shamanistic tradition, the Native peoples type of tradition, fits into that model or that concept of us being these little candles in the sun and being kind of like supporting actors in each other's movies.
I was really blessed to study an apprentice for many, many years with Don Miguel Ruiz, who wrote the Four Agreements. And one of the early teachings when I first started studying with him was this beautiful cosmology that is very similar in that each of us come and we have a big soul, and the big soul is a part of us that's connected to life, eternity, oneness, we can say the sun. And that is our connection to the divine, and that goes from lifetime to lifetime, that big soul part of us. And that when we incarnate, we all get a little soul. And the little soul's our personality, our ego, the part of us that forgets and thinks that we're separate. And actually, when we're little, the little soul and the big soul are connected. So this is, kids are so phenomenal of their deep love and their connection and their joy. And it's because that little soul and big soul are still talking, there's a bridge.
Yeah, they see angels, they hug trees. It's magic.
Yeah, exactly. They're just pure expression of life and love. And as we start learning language, as we start getting domesticated, we start bringing in rules and agreements of how we're supposed to be, of what we're supposed to look like. And one of the things that we talk about is that the current time we're in, the dream of the planet, is really much based in fear and scarcity. And so it's really easy for us as we're learning language, we're domesticated usually from right, wrong, good, bad, judgment, all those things. And so that creates this whole matrix where the little soul starts looking towards the rules and the agreements and who it's supposed to be rather than looking to the big soul. And the beauty is that as you clean up those agreements, you come back home to the divine that's already inside of you. It's not outside. And I think this is sometimes the trick of personal growth is sometimes we're like, I just have to fix myself. I just have to fix my little soul and then everything will be better, or like make the ego go away and then it'll be fine. And what I've seen is that when we embrace all of ourselves, we embrace the little soul and the big soul and the agreements and recognize it's all this perfect experience for us to get free on the inside. All these experiences that help us to remember who we really are, that it becomes a joy then cleaning up whatever arises in our lives. Instead of using everything against ourselves, we start using everything of like, okay, here's the next piece to clean up. And yeah, that place of more and more unconditional love has definitely been my experience of as I've navigated some rough times, that I come out more loving and more present and more grateful, and that we all have that choice. It's not easy though.
One of the essential ingredients to spiritual life is awe, having awe in the creator and fear of the creator too. But you talked about unconditional love. That is amazing. And it's like a step beyond awe. Like you have to develop that deep reverence and respect and awe for the creator before you can get to the place of unconditional loving, you can't skip that step. So if you don't have the awe of the creator, and it's going to be really hard for you to get to that place of unconditional love, of being unconditionally loving, which I believe that to be true. So an example of experiencing awe would be to lay in the grass in the country at night, see the stars, the Milky Way, and just be in such awe and gratitude of what the creator has created for us. And then to maybe think of how infinite God is and the universe of our understanding. And what I imagine, instead of going outward to the edges of the universe as experiencing or trying to imagine infinity, I go in. So I imagine the universe being infinitely large in my heart, sacred heart space. Contemplating the vastness of the universe as an exercise in experiencing awe in God, I think is the true infinite universe is inside of us and not outside, not out in the sky at the edges of the universe, because there are edges to that universe. There is infinity inside. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I so agree. The beauty of learning how to hold ourselves in a new way so we can travel inward to find that glory and that expanse and that connection that's beyond words and beyond understanding. And that's so often part of that journey is learning how to sit with our emotions, be with our body, and open through the stories that we tell ourselves to keep ourselves safe. That's one of the places that I've explored deeply inside of myself and with others, is that so often we can't access that deep love and reverence inside of ourselves because we're afraid of our own emotional body. We're afraid of the old emotions and the fears and the trauma, and we don't know how to access through, or there's so many stories around not being worthy or blaming others or feeling guilty, or all the things that we can create as humans, all those energetic agreements that we create, to learn how to turn ourselves and be with whatever emotion is there, to learn to turn and face ourselves and really look at what's the story I'm telling myself, so that I can get to truth, like get out of that tangle. I see so many of us, like we've really tangled, we're so masterful at this, have tangled our emotional content from the past with the stories that we're telling ourselves. And it keeps us out of that sacred temple inside of us. And so learning that courage.
What would be an example of you going through that yourself?
I created a process called the Warrior Heart Practice, and it was something that dropped into me fully formed, talking to a friend that was really suffering with something. Then I started using it on myself. And an experience where a friend and I, for a couple of years, had been deciding if we were going to be in a relationship. We both felt very mature because we were learning how to be friends and not like jumping into the relationship. It's a really beautiful process. And then I decided one day I'm in, like 100% I'm in. At the same time, they decided I'm out. So we're both going to Mexico, and I'm waiting for this human, and I'm like, so excited, like let's do this. And so the conversation goes something like this: let's do this. Let's go take a week by ourselves someplace and just see what's here. And their response was, okay. And I'm like, oh no, what has happened? And what happened is, literally on the journey to Mexico, they realized it was a no. And then they met somebody on the bus ride to where we were. I was teaching for a week. So I got to teach for a week while watching these two humans fall in love in front of me. There's a backstory to this. So there's all other things. So that's my state where it's really difficult to show up. My heart is breaking. And I went and sat and was like, all right, sweetheart, what are you feeling? And this is the practice, is to start with just, what are you feeling, without trying to fix or change or understand. And I just felt this really deep disappointment. And then, what's the story? So then I went into what I call the story room. So that place of sitting with, just being with the disappointment and with the sorrow that I was feeling, without trying to fix it or change it, just letting myself be there. and breathe through it. And then looking at what's the story that I'm telling myself. And I always say when you go into the story chamber that just let yourself see what's there. Don't try and make it spiritually better or, be nice about it. Like go into the mess. And so I went into the mess, and the mess, there was all these agreements around men always pick younger women. I'm never going to have another partner like my husband, that, the marriage had ended. I don't want to do this like all of this stuff. I'm only going to get hurt. So I just sat with that. And this is the practice. What I've found for myself is that when we can just be with our emotional body without telling ourselves a story about it, but just let ourselves feel whatever we're feeling and be with it with love, like, hi, sweetheart, being with that part of us as if you were sitting with someone who is really sick or dying, just bringing your love and your presence and witness. And then same thing with the story, like, what's the story? So I sat and let the story just be messy and yucky. And then what's the truth? What's actually true here? And what I recognized as I sat in that truth space and got really quiet is that they got to choose. They got to choose who they loved. And my whole body relaxed. And it wasn't a concept, it was like got it. And then the next piece was I get to choose. And my heart just blasted open. It's like, I get to do this differently. And then the fourth chamber of the warrior heart practice is intent. What do you want? What's the one word, the quality that you want to bring forward into whatever the experience is? And my word was love. That's always what I come back to, is how do I love more? How do I become more unconditional? How do I show up with deep respect for life? And so the unwind for me, because with the practice, you start with the feeling, you then look at what the story is, you then step into what's true here, and then you get a clarity around what your intent is, and then you go back. So I went back through the process. Truth, I get to choose, they get to choose. I want to love in this situation. And what I got when I went back into the story chamber, and it's very different when you go back to the story chamber, because you're just open to what's here, what needs to happen, what's my next step. The complete reframe I got was so beautiful, was I'm getting a PhD in letting go. And the universe has crafted this so perfectly that I'm in this situation that I get to really learn how to surrender and let go and love here. And when I went back to the story chamber to close, I always try to close with what am I feeling now? I still felt disappointed. But that eventually just faded out, and it allowed me to then go back into a very difficult situation and be there from my heart and let it help me to become more loving and present and let go of the old stories that I'd been carrying. So that's an example. And that took about 15 minutes to get myself out of the pain that I'd been experiencing.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And what a great, powerful process you outlined here with those four chambers, the feeling, story, truth, and intent. What a different outcome I imagine you would have had if your intent word wasn't love, but instead was, let's say, resilience.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's so fun about this process, is that word, whatever word you feel, will change everything of how you go forward and what choices you make.
The word is more than a word, it's a vibration. And that vibration spreads throughout your world, not just you. It gives you the lens from which you see your life experience and you see the world. And one thing that I learned that was really helpful, and specifically about resilience as a term, is that it didn't serve me as well as the term anti-fragile. I learned about anti-fragility from a book by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. An explanation of it is that certain systems, such as your immune system or Mother Nature, the environment, are able to not only withstand a stressor, but to actually grow from it. It's required. It's part of the unfolding. Your immune system never getting stressed doesn't bode well for you long term.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
So I'm not resilient. I'm anti-fragile. The stressors help me blossom and grow into who I'm really meant to be in this world.
So true. So beautiful story of Arizona. They created a biosphere where they closed down an environment for 3 years. And within the environment, the first 2 years, all the trees grew really fast. And I can imagine scientists were like, those are our trees. And then the third year, all the trees fell over. And when they opened the system up, what they recognized is that trees need wind to stabilize. We need pressure, like you said, that's how we grow. We always tease, I always laugh now in our community, we say, you are a worthy obstacle. Like when something happens that it's a lot of wind, we're like, all right, yes, this is going to make me stronger, anti-fragile. It's a good word. Yeah, more present.
Awesome. Well, that's a good way to end this. So if our listener wants to read your books, or they want to learn from you in to a greater degree, if they want to work with you, attend one of your retreats, I know you also have a community called the Circle. What's the next step for them?
Website, warriorgoddess.com. And I'm on all the social media, or most of them, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. So come check out what's happening there. We always have beautiful events that are happening and ways to connect. So yeah, warriorgoddess.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you, HeatherAsh. Yeah, really appreciate your vulnerability and your candor and wisdom. And I'm sure our listeners did as well.
Thank you so much. Such an honor to be here.
And thank you, listener. It's an honor to have you in my community and as a listener or viewer on my YouTube channel. Do something out of the ordinary that inspires people. And we'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.